The champagne was still cold when her life ended. Not literally, though Wren Ashford would later think, in the months that followed, that the metaphor was close enough to accurate that the distinction barely mattered. She was standing in the center of the Voss family's Hamptons estate on a Saturday evening in late June, wearing a silk gown the color of old ivory, holding a glass of Billicart Salmon Blanc de Blanc that she had not yet tasted because the evening felt too formal to drink casually in, when Colton Voss walked to the front of the room and picked up a microphone. The room was enormous. It had been designed that way, 30-foot ceilings, a wall of glass facing the Atlantic, lighting calibrated to make everyone inside look as if they existed in the best possible version of themselves. 200 guests. The kind of people who flew private and described it as inconvenient. Wren had helped design this party. That was not a small fact. She had spent 11 days on the event architecture. The floral installation she had constructed herself. The ceremony staging. The lighting coordination. Her hands had built the thing she was now standing in the center of, and the flowers she had arranged, pale garden roses, dusty miller, cascading white jasmine along every structural column, were the most beautiful work she had ever done. She had done it because she loved him, or had believed she did. The distinction, she was beginning to understand, mattered. Colton's voice came through the speakers clean and easy, the voice of a man who had been in rooms like this his entire life and had never once been uncertain of his welcome. "I want to take a moment to share something with the people I care about most," he said. "There's been a change to the announcement you may have been expecting tonight." She felt it before she understood it, the specific quality of 200 people shifting their attention, not toward Colton, but toward her. From the left side of the room, near the bar, her sister Skye was moving forward, 26 years old, in a dress the color of champagne that Wren had not seen before, her dark hair down, her expression arranged into something that was trying very hard to look like reluctance, and was not quite succeeding. Skye took Colton's arm. Wren's mother, Pauline, materialized at her elbow with the efficiency of a woman who had been positioned for exactly this moment. Her grip was firm. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a breath and contained no apology. "Hold yourself together. Everyone is watching." Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "I didn't know." Just, "Everyone is watching." Wren looked at her mother's hand on her arm. She looked at the flowers she had arranged with her own hands on the columns around the room. She looked at Skye's champagne dress. She removed her mother's hand. She set the untasted glass of Billicart salmon on the tray of a passing server with the deliberate precision of someone who was deciding, in real time, what kind of person she was going to be. She walked through the crowd without hurrying. She walked out the side door and into the June night, where the Atlantic wind hit her, and the sound of the party continued behind her, and the grass was dark and the ocean was darker, and she stood at the edge of the property with both hands at her sides and breathed. 20 feet away, at the garden wall, a man in plain dark clothes was sitting on a stone ledge, with no drink and no phone, looking at the water with the focused stillness of someone who came to parties in order to find the edge of them. He did not look at her. He reached into the bag beside him, took out a plain bottle of water, and set it on the wall without a word. She stared at it, then at him. He was nobody she recognized, no tailored suit, no practiced socialese, no interest whatsoever in being seen. And she thought, in the specific fog of the worst moment of her adult life, who comes to a party like this and brings grocery store water? And then she thought, And why does that feel like the only honest thing in this entire garden? Her father had built things with his hands. Dale Ashford had been a landscape architect in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Not a famous one, not the kind whose name appeared in design magazines, but the kind whose work lasted. He drew plans in pencil on large drafting paper and revised them with a patience that impressed his clients and baffled his contractors, and he had a habit of explaining to anyone who would listen that the difference between a beautiful garden and a merely correct one was whether the person who designed it had ever actually sat in it. He died when Wren was 23, of a stroke that arrived without warning on a Tuesday afternoon while he was reading in his favorite chair, and the speed of it, the absolute lack of preparation, was something Wren had never fully metabolized. It had simply become part of the structure of her understanding of the world. Things you love can end faster than you can get ready for them. She had inherited his way of working with her hands. She had also inherited his drafting table, which now lived in the back of her Brooklyn flower shop, Ashford and Bloom, covered in sketches for floral installations that were considerably more architecturally ambitious than what most florists attempted. This was why her work was expensive. This was why her client list, built over 7 years of 18-hour days and a near total absence of personal life, included 6 of the top 10 luxury event planners in New York. She had met Colton Voss through a referral. He had needed flowers for a corporate fundraising dinner at the Mandarin Oriental. She had delivered an installation that a photograph of went mildly viral in the design community. He had called to thank her personally, which was unusual for a man in his position, and then called again the following week for reasons that were not about flowers. He was charming in the way of men who have been allowed to be charming their entire lives, effortlessly and without the effort showing. He was attentive. He remembered details. He treated her work with a respect she had not expected from someone whose world operated at the scale his did. She had believed him because she was 31 and tired of being careful, and his attention felt for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, like something real. She had been wrong about the realness. The engagement had lasted 8 months. During those months, Skye had begun appearing at family events with opinions about Colton's work that were more specific than sisterly interest typically warranted. Wren had noticed this and filed it in the folder she kept for things she was not ready to examine. The folder, she now understood, standing at the edge of a Hamptons estate with Atlantic wind in her hair, had been full for considerably longer than she had admitted. Her mother had known. The way Pauline had appeared at her elbow with a prepared instruction, "Hold yourself together. Everyone is watching," was not the behavior of a woman who had just been surprised. It was the behavior of a woman who had been given advance notice and had decided that management was the appropriate response. Wren had supported her mother financially for 4 years following her father's death. She had co-signed Skye's student loans. She had built a business from nothing while mailing checks home and answering late phone calls and arranging flowers for other people's perfect evenings. She thought about all of this at the garden wall. Then the man in plain dark clothes said, without looking at her, without any particular emphasis, the way a person states a weather fact, "You built everything in that room, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. She looked at him. "How did you know?" He glanced once at her hands, the small calluses, the trace of green stain at the base of her thumbnail from the jasmine stems, and looked back at the water. "The flowers," he said. "You arranged them knowing exactly where the light would be at 9 o'clock. His full name was Beckett James Lane, and he had been invisible by choice for 3 years. Not invisible in the literal sense, he had a Brooklyn address, a driver's license, a Chase checking account, and a functional coffee maker that he considered among the top 5 reliable things in his life. But invisible in the sense that mattered in the world, Colton Voss moved through. He had no presence in the architectural press, no active firm listing, no board seats, no charity gala appearances, no Manhattan social profile of any kind. This had required effort. His previous life had generated considerable visibility, and visibility, he had found, was considerably harder to remove than to acquire. At 28, Beckett had co-founded a firm called Lane Meridian Architecture. Not the residential and commercial variety, but the specific category of high-concept structural design that attracted both serious money and serious coverage. They had designed a performing arts center in Austin that won 2 national awards. They had restructured a historic hotel in Charleston that the Preservation Board had spent 8 years fighting over and resolved in 14 months. By 30, his name was in architectural journals in a tone that people in his industry reserved for people they expected to still be discussing in 20 years. At 32, his business partner had restructured the firm's equity, while Beckett was managing the European side of a project in Edinburgh. A clean, legally defensible restructuring that used the complexity of the international project as cover and reduced Beckett's stake from 50% to 11%, while transferring operational control entirely. The partner's name was Colton Voss. Not as principal, Colton had never held a design role, but through a development-backed investment vehicle that had provided the firm's growth capital 3 years earlier, Colton's financial entity held a silent equity position that the restructuring agreement had leveraged in a way Beckett's attorney described, after the fact, as aggressive, but technically within the parameters of the original agreement. Beckett had spent 14 months in litigation. He had recovered a negotiated settlement that was financially adequate and personally insufficient, and had signed an NDA that prevented him from discussing the specific details of the equity dispute with the press, with investors, or with anyone connected to the Voss Development Network. He had then disassembled his professional profile with the same methodical precision he brought to structural design and moved into a rental apartment in Red Hook, where he did independent consulting under a holding company name that appeared nowhere in any document connected to his original firm. He was at the Hamptons party because Senator Harold Voss, Colton's father, had extended the invitation directly through a mutual contact who had not known the history. Harold Voss, Beckett had reason to believe, was about to make a decision regarding a major municipal development contract in Lower Manhattan. Beckett had designed the proposal. He needed 30 minutes with the senator. He had not anticipated the woman in the ivory dress. He had been watching the party from the garden for 40 minutes when she walked out of it. He had recognized her work immediately. He had seen Ashford and Bloom's installations twice at industry events and had thought, both times, that whoever designed them understood structural light in a way that most florists did not. He had not known she was Colton's fiancé. He found this out 20 minutes later, when he looked at his phone and found a news alert. A guest had already posted the moment to social media, captioned it, "The most dramatic engagement party of the summer." And he sat on the stone ledge in the Hamptons, dark with the Atlantic wind and the screen in his hand, and understood that the woman currently drinking his grocery store water had just been publicly discarded by the same man who had taken everything Beckett had spent 6 years building. And the feeling that moved through him then was not sympathy, exactly. It was the specific, complicated recognition of someone who already knew what that particular kind of loss felt like from the inside. By 7 the next morning, the internet had already decided the story. A 30-second video clip had moved from a single Instagram story to 400,000 views overnight. The comment section had sorted itself into two camps: those who found the spectacle thrilling and those who found it devastating. And both camps were equally certain they knew exactly what Wren Ashford was feeling, despite never having met her. Wren sat in the corner booth of a diner in Bridgehampton that had been open since 1974 and had the particular immunity of old diners to the world outside their windows. She had driven there at 6, still in yesterday's clothes, before the social media cycle had fully formed, and had ordered coffee and eggs and was eating both with the determined efficiency of someone who had decided that the body's requirements did not pause for personal catastrophe. Her phone had 47 unread messages. She did not read them. She read the menu instead, laminated, coffee-stained, unchanged since approximately the Clinton administration. And then she read it again and found this steadying in a way she could not have explained. The man from the garden had not been there when she went back inside for her jacket at midnight. The stone ledge had been empty. She had not expected to think about him again and had been thinking about him intermittently ever since, which she attributed to the specific psychological phenomenon of latching onto irrelevant details during acute stress. She called Greta Sumner at 7:15. Greta had owned the building that housed Ashford and Bloom for 22 years, a narrow 3-story brownstone on Bergen Street in Brooklyn that she had purchased as a rental property and had gradually, through the 20 years since her children moved out and her husband retired to their house in Vermont, come to think of as her real home. She managed the building with unhurried competence and an absolute refusal to pretend she wasn't paying close attention to her tenants. "I saw," Greta said before Wren could speak. "I need to talk through some things. Come to the shop Monday. I'll have the back room." "Not the shop. I need—" Wren stopped. Through the diner window, a man was walking a dog on the empty morning street, an ordinary thing in an ordinary town, and she watched them for a moment. "I need to figure out what I'm actually going to do. Not feel. Do." "Monday," Greta said again, firmly. "The feeling comes first, whether you want it to or not. You know that." She did know that. She paid for breakfast in cash and drove back to the city with the windows down and the morning coming in off the expressway with its particular smell of salt and distance. She thought about her father's drafting table. She thought about the 7 years it had taken to build a client list. She thought about the Voss Estates installation, 40 hours of work, the best flowers she had ever arranged, built inside a room that had been a stage set for her own humiliation. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. She let it ring. It rang again. She pulled off the expressway, sat in a parking lot at the edge of a strip mall outside Babylon, New York, and picked up. "The right thing to do," Pauline said, "is to call Colton and handle this like adults." "Mom?" Wren's voice was very flat. "Did you know?" A silence. "I knew there were complications," Pauline said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Another silence. Longer. "I thought it might resolve itself," Pauline said finally. And those 5 words, not a denial, not an apology, just a careful description of having known and chosen to wait, were the most precise accounting of her mother's love that Wren had ever received. She hung up sat in the parking lot for 4 full minutes, and then pulled back onto the expressway, because the only direction that made sense was forward, and the city was in that direction, and her shop was in the city, and her work was in the shop, and work was the one thing that had never once pretended to be something it wasn't. Greta Sumner had 3 rules for the back room of the Bergen Street building. The first was that the coffee was always real. Not the pod machine variety, but the stovetop mocha pot her late mother had brought from Naples in 1963, which Greta had used every morning for 30 years, and which produced a result that she described as coffee that takes itself seriously. The second was that whatever was said in the back room stayed there. The third was that no one was required to perform composure. Wren arrived Monday at 9 and cried for approximately 4 minutes, sitting in the worn green armchair that had occupied the same corner of the room since before she'd moved into the building. She cried in the specific, contained way of someone who had been holding something since Saturday night and had finally found a location where releasing it seemed structurally safe. Greta poured coffee and waited. When it was done, Wren said, "I'm not sad about Colton." "I know," Greta said. "I'm sad about being wrong, about how long I—" She stopped. "I knew something was wrong. I filed it away. I told myself I was overthinking." "You weren't overthinking." "No." Greta sat across from her with her own coffee, looking at Wren with the direct, unsentimental attention she gave everything. She was 64, broad-shouldered, white-haired, with the hands of a woman who had done real work her entire life. She had been a social worker for 20 years, before the building became her primary occupation. She did not treat distress as inconvenience. "There's something I should tell you," Greta said. Wren looked up. "About the building." She waited. "The man who actually owns this block," Greta said, "is not the management company listed on your lease." Wren set down her coffee. "The building was purchased 8 years ago by a holding company," Greta continued. "I manage it independently under a long-term arrangement. The owner, the actual owner, has never wanted to be identified in the lease documentation. I've respected that because I've known him for years and I trust his reasons." "Why are you telling me this now?" Greta looked at her steadily. "Because you met him Saturday night, at the garden wall." Wren was quiet for 5 seconds. "The man with the water bottle. His name is Beckett Lane." She said nothing. She looked at the mocha pot on the counter. She looked at the green armchair. She looked at the window that overlooked the Bergen Street alley, where she had taken her lunch break almost every day for 6 years, sitting on the back stoop of a building that belonged, it turned out, to a stranger she had spoken to once on the worst night of her adult life. "He knows who I am?" she said. "He's known since about midnight Saturday," Greta said. "He looked you up. He called me Sunday morning." She paused. "He didn't ask me to tell you. He said it was your information to have or not have." Wren looked at her. "Then why are you telling me?" "Because," Greta said with the patient emphasis of a woman who had been answering this category of question for 40 years, "you deserve to know what the actual ground looks like under your feet before you decide what to build next." She refilled Wren's coffee, set the pot back on the stove, and added, "He also told me something else. About Colton Voss. About what happened to him 3 years ago." She sat down. "And when I heard it, I thought, this woman needs to know that she is not the first person that man has taken something from." She found him on a Thursday, not because Greta had arranged it. Greta had specifically not arranged it. had given Wren his phone number written on the back of a Bergen Street parking permit, and said nothing further, which was its own form of instruction. She called him Wednesday evening from her apartment, standing at the kitchen window with the Brooklyn rooftops going orange in the late light. He picked up on the second ring. "Greta told you," he said, not as an accusation, as a fact. "Yes. I would have told you myself," he said, "when the time was right. I hadn't decided when that was yet. I appreciate the honesty. It's the only approach I have." They met the next afternoon at a coffee shop in Cobble Hill, not the curated aesthetic variety, just a neighborhood place with round tables and a counter that had been there since before specialty. Coffee was a concept anyone used. He was already there when she arrived. Dark jacket, plain clothes, a coffee and a notepad with several lines of small, precise handwriting. She sat down. She looked at him in the afternoon light with the full assessing attention she brought to things she needed to understand accurately. He met it without performing anything. No easy smile, no social calibration, just present. "Tell me about the firm," she said. He told her, all of it. The same complete version he had been carrying for 3 years. The partnership, the Edinburgh project, the restructuring, the NDA. He told her about the months of litigation, about what he had recovered and what he had not, about the 3 years of deliberate invisibility. She listened without filling the pauses. When he finished, she said, "The NDA, does it cover what you just told me?" "It covers statements to the press and to business entities with financial relationships to the Voss network." He looked at her steadily. "Having coffee with a florist from Brooklyn is outside its parameters." Something in her expression shifted, not a smile, but adjacent to one. "He did the same architecture to me," she said. "Different materials, same structure." She looked at her coffee. "My company, Ashford and Bloom's commercial division, I was in the process of formalizing a partnership with a Voss-affiliated event planning group. 3 months from now, I would have signed documents that would have given them significant leverage over my client relationships in exchange for capital I didn't actually need." She paused. "I almost did it because he asked me to." Beckett looked at her. "I pulled back because the equity structure looked wrong," she said. 2 weeks ago. I couldn't fully explain why it looked wrong. I'm not a corporate attorney, but something in the figures was off, and I trusted that. What was wrong with it? She described it. He listened, and as she spoke, she watched him move through it, not with the performative interest of someone being polite, but with the focused tracking of someone who understood the structural logic of what she was describing and was following it to its actual conclusion. "The control provision on page 7, he said when she finished. "That's the mechanism. It looks like a standard protective clause until the triggering conditions are read alongside the board composition requirement. Combined, they give the capital partner effective veto over any contract above a certain value." She looked at him. "You've seen this before." "I've seen his work before." The afternoon light moved across the table between them, and she thought about the garden wall and the plain bottle of water, and the man who had known from a 30-foot floral installation that she had built everything in that room. And she understood, with the specific clarity that comes from two people recognizing the same shape of loss from opposite sides of it, that they had both been standing in the same field of someone else's damage for 3 years without knowing the other was there. Beckett had been wrong about one thing. He had assumed, when Harold Voss extended the Hamptons party invitation, that the senator was unaware of the history between Beckett and Colton. This was the assumption that had shaped his entire strategy for the evening. Get in, reach the senator through the crowd, 30 minutes and a proposal, out before Colton noticed. He discovered he was wrong on a Friday afternoon, 10 days after the party, through a phone call from the mutual contact who had arranged the invitation. "He knew who you were," the contact said. "Harold knew. He invited you deliberately." Beckett sat in the Red Hook apartment with this information for a long time. He called his attorney, Daphne Cho, who operated out of an office on Fulton Street in Lower Manhattan, and whose practice was narrow and excellent. Commercial contract disputes with an emphasis on equity fraud. She had handled Beckett's litigation against the Voss-linked restructuring 3 years ago and had never, in Beckett's experience, expressed a reaction she hadn't fully thought through first. "Harold Voss invited you to a party where his son was planning to publicly humiliate his fiancé," she said when he finished. "On the same evening." "Yes. And you believe this was deliberate on Harold's part?" "The timing is too precise to be coincidental." She was quiet for a moment. Then Harold knew about the announcement in advance, which means he knew what Colton was going to do to that woman. "And he wanted a witness," Beckett said. "Someone with motive and knowledge and an NDA that would prevent him from going to the press directly." Why? Beckett had been sitting with this question. Because Harold Voss is running for re-election in November, and because there is something in Colton's recent dealings that Harold cannot afford to have surface during the campaign. You think Harold is positioning himself to distance from Colton? I think Harold Voss has been building a real estate empire for 40 years and has a political career worth protecting and a son who has been getting sloppier. He paused. I think Colton took something from me 3 years ago with Harold's tacit awareness, and now Harold needs something in return. Daphne was quiet for a longer moment. What does he need from you? He needs me to finish what I started the night of the party, the municipal development proposal, the Lower Manhattan contract. Beckett leaned back. It's a $300 million project. If it goes through Harold's committee under my design, it generates a political win for Harold and creates distance from Colton's controversies simultaneously. And what do you get? The NDA was a condition of the civil settlement, he said. The civil settlement can be revisited if the underlying equity dispute is found to have involved material misrepresentation. He paused. If Harold's office produces certain internal communications from 2020, communications I believe exist, and Harold knows exist, the misrepresentation case reopens. You want Harold to give you the documents in exchange for the proposal. Another silence. This is a very specific kind of dangerous, Daphne said. I know. There's one more thing, she said. If Harold knew about the engagement announcement and invited you as a witness, then the woman, Wren Ashford, was not incidental. She was part of Harold's calculation. Which means Harold Voss looked at a 31-year-old woman building flowers for her own engagement party and decided she was useful. The silence that followed was the longest in the conversation, and when Beckett finally spoke, his voice had changed in a way that Daphne Cho, who had known him for 3 years, had never heard before. She almost missed them. The documents arrived on a Tuesday, buried inside a forwarded email chain from the Voss-affiliated event company she had nearly signed with, a chain she had received as part of a routine file transfer when she formally withdrew from the partnership discussions. 16 emails. most of them logistical. 3 of them in the middle of the chain that had been included by mistake. She was reading the chain at 11 at night at her drafting table in the back of the shop because she found that her father's table made difficult things easier to think through, and she almost stopped at email 12 because the thread seemed to be concluding. She kept going because she had a policy of finishing what she started. Email 14 was a message between 2 people whose names she did not recognize, discussing the Ashford integration timeline. Email 15 was a response discussing what they called the post-execution equity capture, a phrase she did not fully understand, but wrote down on the legal pad beside the drafting table in her careful handwriting with a question mark. Email 16 was a message from Colton Voss to both parties, dated 8 months ago, in which he referred to Wren's client list as the primary asset and described the partnership proposal she had nearly signed as the cleanest capture structure we've used. The word capture. She sat at her father's drafting table for a long time. She called Beckett at midnight. He picked up immediately, which told her he had not been asleep. "I need to read you something," she said. She read him the 3 emails. He was quiet through all of them. When she finished, he said, "Forward them to me, and to Daphne Cho, tonight." "Who is Daphne Cho?" "My attorney. She needs to see these before morning." "Why before morning?" A pause. "Because I have a meeting with Harold Voss tomorrow afternoon, and this changes what I bring to it." She was quiet for a moment. "What's the meeting about?" "Something I should have told you earlier," he said, "and something I'm going to tell you right now, completely, because you deserve to know the full shape of what's happening before tomorrow." He told her about Harold, about the invitation, the NDA, the documents, the calculation. He told her everything with the same complete honesty she had come to recognize as his default mode. Not managed, not edited for her comfort, just accurate. When he finished, she said, "Harold used me. He used both of us. He watched his son humiliate me publicly and decided it was an opportunity." Yes. She looked at her father's drafting table, at the sketches pinned to the wall above it, installations she had designed, geometries of flowers and light that had been built in rooms all over New York, the work of 7 years rendered in pencil on paper. "What do you need from me for tomorrow?" she said. "Nothing." His voice was careful. "This is not your fight to carry." "Beckett." Her voice was even. "He used my client list as bait. He called me a capture structure. He watched my sister walk out of a crowd to take my fiancé, and he thought it was a useful disruption." She paused. "This is my fight. What do you need?" The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. She counted, the way she counted when she needed something to be precise, and then he said, "The emails alone aren't enough. But if we can show that the capture structure was coordinated with the equity misrepresentation from 3 years ago, the same playbook, different target, Daphne believes the NDA becomes unenforceable, and an unenforceable NDA means everything comes out." A beat. Everything. Harold Voss met them both. He had not been told Wren would be there. Beckett had made the decision Tuesday night and had not asked permission, because the appropriate move in a room designed to manage you was to arrive as the version of yourself that couldn't be managed. Harold Voss was 67, silver-haired, and carried his seniority the way men who have been powerful for a long time carry it, not as a performance, but as simple fact. He had an office on Park Avenue that looked like the inside of a decision. Dark wood and American history, and windows facing the midtown skyline. When Wren walked in behind Beckett, Harold's expression moved through three things in 2 seconds: recognition, recalculation, and something that was almost, but not quite, discomfort. "Miss Ashford," he said, "I wasn't expecting—" "I know," she said. She sat down without being invited and put her hands flat on the table with the calm of a woman who had been sitting at tables where she wasn't expected for 31 years and had stopped finding it significant. Beckett set a folder on the table. "The municipal proposal," he said. "Complete. Ready to move. We're here to discuss the terms of the exchange." Harold looked at him. "We discussed the parameters." "The parameters changed Tuesday night," Beckett said. "Ms. Ashford received documents that extend the pattern beyond my case. The capture structure Colton used on Ashford and Bloom is the same playbook used in the 2020 equity restructuring that your investment vehicle benefited from." Harold was very still. "We're not here to make threats," Wren said. She kept her voice even. "We're here because you invited both of us, deliberately on the same night, for reasons that served your purposes and not ours. We'd like that accounting to be corrected." Harold looked at her with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. He had expected Beckett. He had not expected this. "The internal communications from 2020, Beckett said. "The ones that show the investment vehicle had advanced knowledge of the restructuring timeline. You have them. We know you have them because the legal discovery request 3 years ago flagged their existence, and they were withheld under executive privilege." Executive privilege doesn't cover private investment decisions, Daphne Cho said from the doorway, where she had been standing for the past 90 seconds. Harold looked at the door, at Daphne, at the folder, at Wren. He looked like a man doing very fast arithmetic and not entirely liking the result. "You're asking me to produce documents that implicate my son," he said. "We're noting that you already decided your son was a liability," Beckett said. "The Hamptons' invitation confirmed that. You're managing the exposure. We're simply telling you what form the management needs to take." A long silence. Harold looked at Wren. "You understand what this does to the family." "Senator," she said quietly, "your son called me a capture structure. He watched my sister take my place at an engagement party he had designed as a disruption, and he considered it useful." She looked at him steadily. "I have a great deal of empathy for complicated families. I don't have empathy for people who use other people as instruments, with respect." Harold Voss looked at the folder on his desk, and then at the Manhattan skyline through the window, and in the specific silence of a man arriving at a decision he has been approaching for a long time, he said, "I'll need 48 hours. And Daphne Cho said, "You have 24. Sky called on a Wednesday morning from a number Wren didn't recognize, which meant she was calling from a borrowed phone because she expected to be declined. She was right that it would have been declined. She was right that it was the borrowed phone that got through. Wren was in the shop, reconstructing a centerpiece installation for a client rescheduled from the weekend, working with the focused discipline she always brought to her hands when her mind was carrying too much. The unfamiliar number. She answered on instinct. "I know you're not going to forgive me," Sky said. She sounded like she had rehearsed this and then abandoned the rehearsal halfway. "I'm not asking for that." Wren kept working. She held the phone between her cheek and shoulder, and continued weaving stems because stopping felt like giving the conversation more than it had earned yet. I want to tell you something that's true. Sky continued. He told me you were ending it. Before the party. He told me you had agreed to step back and that the announcement was something you were both doing together. Wren's hands did not stop. I believed him, Sky said. Her voice had the raw, stripped quality of someone who had cried recently and had stopped only recently. I know you're thinking that I wanted to believe him, that I was looking for a reason, that I've been... She stopped. You know how I've been with you. I know you know. I've been jealous of you for so long that I stopped noticing it had become the shape of how I thought about everything. Wren set down the flower stem she was holding. He's not who I thought, Sky said. He's cold in a way I didn't see until I was inside it. He looks at me and I can tell he's calculating something. A pause. I think I was convenient. I think you were inconvenient. And I think I let myself be his instrument because I wanted something that was yours. The shop was quiet. The Bergen Street morning was doing its ordinary thing outside the window. Are you still with him? Wren asked. I left. Last week. I'm at a friend's in Queens. A silence. Mom doesn't know yet. She'll want you to go back. I know. Sky's voice was small. She always tells us to manage how things look. Yes, I'm tired of managing how things look. Wren looked at the half-built centerpiece on the work table, at her father's drafting sketches on the wall, at the shop she had built with her hands over 7 years. Okay, she said. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But okay. What does that mean? It means you called from a borrowed phone because you knew I needed honesty more than access, Wren said. That's the first correctly calibrated thing you've done in a long time. It's something to build from. She hung up and stood in the shop for a moment, looking at the flowers in her hands. Garden roses, the same pale variety she had arranged in the Voss estate columns, the ones she had placed with her exact knowledge of where the 9 o'clock light would fall, and thought about how the same hands that had built a room for her own humiliation were now building something else entirely, and that this was, in its way, the most honest summary of what it meant to keep going. The documents arrived at Daphne Cho's office at 11:47 the following evening. Not within 24 hours, but within 23, which Daphne noted with professional satisfaction. There were 41 pages. She called Beckett at midnight and said, "You need to come in and bring Wren." They sat in Daphne's conference room on Fulton Street at 1 in the morning, with the documents spread across the table and the Manhattan skyline visible through the window, and Daphne walked them through what Harold Voss had produced with the measured, precise delivery of someone who understood that the people in front of her needed facts in the correct order. The internal communications from 2020 confirmed what Beckett had suspected. The investment vehicle holding the silent equity position in Lane Meridian Architecture had received advanced documentation of the restructuring timeline 14 days before Beckett was notified. The communications showed 3 exchanges between Colton's attorney and the investment vehicle's managing director that discussed the Edinburgh project's timeline specifically as cover, using the phrase international project complexity as the delay justification in a way that suggested it had been engineered rather than encountered. This was the equity fraud case. This was what Daphne needed. But that was page 1 through 22. Page 23 was something none of them had anticipated. It was a financial transfer record, a series of payments from a Voss Development subsidiary to a company called Bloom Advisory Group, dated over an 18-month period, beginning 4 months before Wren's engagement to Colton. Wren leaned forward. Bloom Advisory Group was a consulting entity. Its registered agent was Pauline Ashford, her mother. The payments totaled $84,000. Daphne looked at Wren carefully. "Do you know about this company?" "No." Wren's voice was flat. "I've never heard of it." The payment descriptions listed as Strategic Relationship Consulting. Wren sat with this information for a long time. The conference room was very quiet. Beckett did not move. Daphne did not fill the silence. Pauline Ashford had received $84,000 from a Voss subsidiary over 18 months, during the period when Colton was pursuing Wren, during the period when Wren was building the Voss estate installation, during the period when Pauline had been encouraging the match with the specific practical warmth of a woman who saw a good marriage as a financial solution. "She didn't just know," Wren said after a while. "It appears she may have been compensated for facilitating access," Daphne said carefully. "To me." The two words landed in the room with no particular drama, just the flat, complete accuracy of a fact being placed where it belonged. She did not cry. She looked at the transfer records with the same steady attention she brought to everything that required understanding, and she understood it completely, and she filed it in the correct column, and she breathed. Beckett, who had been watching her with the careful, unobtrusive attention he brought to things he respected, said very quietly, "You don't have to respond to this tonight." She looked at him. "I know," she said, "but I need to know. Does this affect the legal case?" Daphne said, "It strengthens it considerably. It establishes a coordinated pattern." Wren nodded once. "Then it goes in." She said it the way she said all things that had been fully decided. "Whatever it costs." She drove to her mother's apartment in Hoboken on a Saturday morning, across the bridge in the early light, and she did not call ahead. Pauline answered the door in a bathrobe with coffee in her hand and the specific unguarded expression of a woman who had not yet assembled her presentation for the day. She saw Wren's face, and the presentation attempted to assemble anyway. The managed smile, the prepared warmth, and did not fully complete itself. "Come in," she said. Wren came in. She sat at the kitchen table. She did not accept coffee. She placed a photocopy of the transfer records on the table between them. Pauline looked at it. Her hand on her coffee cup was very still. "It was not what it—" she started. "Mom." Wren's voice was not angry. It was the voice she used when she needed accuracy more than she needed reaction. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because I need to understand, in full, what happened, before the legal process reaches a point where the understanding has to happen in a different room." Pauline sat down. She was 58, and looked this morning her exact age in a way she usually managed not to. "He came to me first," she said. "Colton, before he approached you. He said he had a business interest in your client network and asked if I could facilitate an introduction." She looked at the table. "I said yes. The payment started. I told myself it was consulting work. For 18 months. Yes. Did you know he planned to take the business?" "I didn't know the details. I knew there was a partnership discussion in the future." She paused. "I told myself you would benefit from the capital." "Did you know about Sky?" A longer pause. "Not until closer to the party. He told me 2 weeks before. He said the relationship had changed, that you and he were—" She stopped. He told you the same lie he told Sky, Wren said. Her mother did not answer, which was its own answer. Wren looked at the window. The Hoboken morning was ordinary and indifferent, and completely unbothered by any of this. I supported you for 4 years, Wren said. After Dad died, I co-signed Sky's loans. I mailed you $800 every first of the month. She was not listing this for effect. She was listing it with the flat precision of a woman reviewing a ledger. And you took $84,000 from the man who was planning to use me, and you told yourself it was consulting. Pauline's eyes had filled. She did not let the tears fall. The management ran deep, but they were there. I know, she said. I'm not asking for an apology today, Wren said. I'm telling you that this information is part of a legal proceeding. Your attorney will need to contact Daphne Cho. She stood, and I'm telling you that I love you. That doesn't change. But the shape of what we are to each other needs to change, and you need to understand that I'm serious about that. She left without taking the photocopy. She sat in her car on the Hoboken street for a long time before driving back across the bridge, and she thought about her father, who had designed gardens that lasted, who had said that the difference between a beautiful space and a merely correct one was whether the person who built it had ever actually sat in it. She thought about how many rooms she had built for other people's beautiful occasions, while the structure of her own life was being quietly undermined by the people she trusted most. And she thought, I know how to build things that last. I just need to build them for myself this time. Daphne Cho called on a Monday morning, with the voice she used when the information was significant, and she had already processed her reaction and was ready to deliver facts. The capture structure, she said. The one in the emails you forwarded. We've been treating it as a play for your client list. It wasn't, Wren said. Not primarily. A pause. Your client list was the access mechanism. The primary target was a single client. Terrace Group, the luxury hospitality developer. They've been your anchor client for 4 years. I know who they are. Terrace Group is in the early stages of a $200 million property portfolio expansion in the Hudson Valley. They've been using your floral and event design work as the aesthetic framework for their brand presentation. The visual identity that's been driving their acquisition conversations with investors. Daphne paused. There is a financing structure that Terrace Group's founder, a man named Merritt Holloway, has been negotiating for 6 months. Colton Voss has been trying to get into that financing structure for 2 years and has been blocked because Holloway doesn't like him. Wren was quiet. If Colton acquired controlling leverage over your company's contract with Terrace Group, Daphne continued, he had a mechanism to insert himself into the financing conversation. Through you, through your work, through a relationship Holloway trusts because he trusts you. She sat down. She was in the shop at her father's drafting table, and she pressed one hand flat against the surface of it. He was going to use my relationship with Merritt to force his way into a deal Merritt wouldn't give him directly, she said. That's what the documents indicate. Merritt has to know. I've already called his legal team, Daphne said. They'd like to meet with you Wednesday. Merritt Holloway was 63, the kind of self-made man who had retained both his skepticism and his generosity through 40 years of being right about enough things to make the skepticism credible. He sat across from Wren on Wednesday afternoon in Terrace Group's Hudson Yards office and read the relevant documents with the patient thoroughness of someone who processed things fully the first time, and did not need to be walked through them. When he finished, he looked at her. "How long have you known?" he asked. 10 days. "And the relationship with Voss? The engagement? You ended it." "It was ended for me," she said. "Publicly." He nodded. He looked at the documents again. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to know," she said simply. "I'm not here to ask for anything. You deserve to understand the full context of how your name appeared in documents related to a man you've been correctly avoiding for 2 years." He looked at her for a moment. "The work you've done for us, the installations, the brand framework. Yes, that wasn't a business strategy. That's how you work." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The portfolio expansion, the brand presentation work." He set the documents down. "I'd like to formalize that arrangement with Ashford and Bloom directly, if you're interested." She looked at him, at the straightforward, uncomplicated respect of a man who had just seen someone tell him a difficult truth when the easier thing would have been silence, and understood that this was what the actual shape of a fair exchange felt like. Not capture, not leverage, just, here is the work, here is the value, here is what it's worth. She said, "I'm interested," and Merritt Holloway said, "Good." And outside the Hudson Yards window, the city was doing exactly what it always did, enormous and indifferent, and full of rooms where honest people were building things that would last. She made dinner. This was not a significant statement on its own. She cooked regularly, efficiently, with the same practical competence she brought to everything domestic. But she called Beckett on a Thursday and said, "Come to the shop at 7. I'll cook in the back room." And there was a directness to it that was different from their previous meetings, which had all taken place on neutral ground. He arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine. A straightforward choice, a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. She later noted he had selected with the same lack of performance he brought to everything else. She had set the drafting table with 2 plates and moved the sketches to a corkboard on the wall, and the back room had the quality of a space that was genuinely lived in. Greta's armchair, the mocha pot, her father's drafting equipment, the smell of cut stems and good soil. They ate and talked about the case, the documents, Daphne's timeline, the terrace group meeting. Functional, real, necessary. When the plates were cleared and the wine was at the last third of the bottle, she said, "I want to ask you something." "All right." "The building. This building. You've owned it for 8 years and you never introduced yourself." "No." "You've known Greta for longer than I've been a tenant. She talks about you, not by name, but there's a person in her stories who's clearly the same person. She's protective of you. She's protective of people she decides are worth it," Beckett said. "She doesn't distribute that casually. She told me about you the week after the party, not before." "I know," she told me. Wren looked at him. "If the Hamptons party hadn't happened, if I hadn't walked out into the garden, would you have ever introduced myself?" He looked at his wine. "I've been in this building for 8 years. You've been here for 6. I've seen your work in 2 locations." He paused. "I thought about it." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because the last time I trusted the construction of something without fully understanding all the load-bearing points, I lost everything I'd built." He said it without drama, just the flat accuracy of a fact about himself he had made peace with. "I got careful. I got too careful. And careful is a thing that can hold you together and simultaneously prevent you from building anything new." She nodded. I know that specific kind of careful. I imagine you do. She looked at the sketches on the wall, her father's drafting tools beside the mocha pot, the 6-year accumulation of a life built by hand. I'm not asking for anything fast, she said. I'm not in a position to want anything fast, but I want to be honest about what this is becoming for me. He looked at her directly, the full, unguarded look. It's the same, he said, for me. She poured the last of the Willamette Valley Pinot into both glasses, and they sat in Greta's back room with the Bergen Street night outside, and the draft sketches on the wall, and two people being honest with each other without managing it. And it was the quietest and most structural thing that had happened to either of them in 3 years, and they both understood that completely. Without saying it out loud, Daphne Cho filed the reopened equity fraud complaint on a Tuesday in September. She filed it with the equity documentation Harold had produced, the internal communication showing advance knowledge of the restructuring timeline, and the coordinated pattern evidence linking the Lane Meridian restructuring to the Ashford and Bloom capture attempt. She filed it with the $84,000 payment records establishing Pauline's consulting arrangement and the emails discussing Wren's client list as primary asset. The complaint named Colton Voss, the investment vehicle's managing director, and 2 attorneys. It did not name Harold Voss. This was intentional, and it was Daphne's call, and it was correct. Harold had produced the documents voluntarily, within the agreed window, without conditions. The NDA, which Daphne had argued in a supplemental filing, was unenforceable on grounds of material misrepresentation in the original settlement, was simultaneously challenged. The financial press picked it up within 48 hours. The first piece was in Bloomberg, factual, dry, focused on the equity restructuring mechanics. The Wall Street Journal followed with a longer piece the next morning that included background on Lane Meridian architecture, Beckett's original firm, and the timeline of the Edinburgh project as cover. The photograph that accompanied the journal piece was an image of the Performing Arts Center in Austin, the project that had established Beckett's reputation before any of it. A clean, beautiful building standing in full morning light. Colton Voss issued a statement through his attorneys, characterizing the complaint as a retaliatory filing by a disgruntled former partner, and noting that the original settlement had been reached voluntarily. This statement generated more coverage than the complaint itself, because journalists who had been in the room at the Hamptons' engagement party, 2 of them, it turned out, had been guests, now had professional context for a story they had filed as social gossip and could revisit as something considerably more substantial. One of them called Wren. She did not give an interview. She referred the reporter to Daphne. What she did give, through Daphne, was a statement. Ashford and Bloom's participation in these proceedings reflects our commitment to honest business practices and the protection of client relationships built on trust. 14 words. Precise. Merritt Holloway's Terrace Group released its own statement the same day, confirming the formalized partnership with Ashford and Bloom, and noting that the relationship had been established on the basis of work quality and professional integrity. Colton's PR team issued a second statement. Nobody ran it. Skye called that evening from her own phone. "I saw everything," she said. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Wren said. "Is there anything?" "Not yet, but there will be." She paused. "Thank you for calling." 3 days after the filing, Colton Voss's development group announced a strategic restructuring. The specific kind of announcement that means the people with money have decided to move it elsewhere. 2 board members resigned. A midtown commercial project he had been leading was transferred to a different developer. And in a detail that appeared in only one publication, a small financial trade blog that covered tri-state real estate with more accuracy than most larger outlets, the Voss family's connection to Senator Harold Voss's re-election campaign was quietly, officially, and permanently severed. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday in October at Daphne's Fulton Street offices. Colton arrived with 3 attorneys and the particular posture of a man who had convinced himself, during the weeks between the filing and this morning, that he retained leverage he did not actually retain. He wore a suit the color of slate and sat at the conference table with the smooth, practiced ease of someone who had spent his career being the most powerful person in any room he entered. He was not the most powerful person in this room. Daphne opened with the Edinburgh Project timeline communications. She laid them on the table one by one with the methodical patience of someone building a structure they intend to be permanent, and she asked Colton, for each document, to confirm the date, the participants, and his understanding of the phrase International Project Complexity as cover. His attorneys objected twice. Both objections were overruled by the supervising attorney, a retired federal judge serving as neutral arbiter. On the 4th document, Colton's lead attorney requested a recess. The recess lasted 50 minutes. When they returned, Colton's lead attorney indicated that his client wished to make a proffer, a preliminary disclosure of facts in exchange for a discussion of terms. Daphne said, "We'll hear it." What Colton's attorney disclosed over the following 90 minutes was the full operational structure of the equity capture system. Not just the Lane Meridian instance, not just the Ashford and Bloom attempt, but 5 additional cases over a 7-year period. Different targets, same playbook. Identify a business with valuable client relationships. Use a personal connection to gain trust. Structure a capital arrangement with embedded control provisions. Execute the transfer when the operational complexity made challenge difficult. 5 additional companies. 5 additional people who had built something and had it taken. Daphne, who had been in legal practice for 18 years and had a personal rule about visible reactions, allowed herself one. She closed her notebook, set her pen down, and looked at the table for exactly 3 seconds before picking up the pen again. Colton did not look at anyone directly during the disclosure. He looked at a fixed point above the conference room window with the focused vacancy of a man who had been carrying the full weight of what he had done and had finally put it down somewhere it couldn't be retrieved. His lead attorney proposed a settlement framework. Daphne said, "We'll respond in writing in 48 hours." In the hallway afterward, Wren stood with Beckett and Daphne, and no one said anything for a moment. Then Daphne said, "5 others." "Yes," Beckett said, "they need to know about this proceeding." "They will." Wren looked at the Fulton Street corridor. Ordinary fluorescent light, ordinary carpet, the particular non-presence of legal office buildings. She thought about 5 other people who had built something and had it quietly taken. She said, "When the settlement is structured, can we require disclosure to all 5 as a condition?" Daphne looked at her. "That's unusual. Is it possible?" "Yes." "Then it's a condition," Wren said. All 5 of them deserved to know they weren't alone in it. And Daphne Cho, who had a personal rule about visible reactions, allowed herself a second one. She nodded once, with the specific, unguarded approval of a person recognizing something that is exactly right. The settlement was reached in November, and its terms were unusual. Daphne had negotiated with the precision of someone who understood that a settlement is not the end of a story, but the structure that determines what the story means. The financial compensation to Beckett, covering the equity value he had lost, 4 years of projected revenue, and legal costs, was significant. The compensation to Wren covered the value of the client relationships that had been targeted, the installation work she had provided to the Voss estate, and the professional damages of the engagement party's public impact on her business. But the conditions were what mattered. Condition 1. Full disclosure to all 5 additional parties identified in the proffer, with documentation of the relevant capture structures in each case. Condition 2. The NDA governing Beckett's original settlement was voided in its entirety, with a formal acknowledgement that it had been executed under conditions of material misrepresentation. Condition 3. Colton Voss's investment vehicle was barred from entering any capital arrangement with businesses in the event design, architectural design, or luxury hospitality sectors for a period of 10 years. Condition 4. Wren's specific condition, the one Daphne had negotiated last and hardest. A formal written acknowledgement on the record that the firms and individuals targeted had built legitimate businesses through legitimate work, and that the equity capture methodology had been predatory in nature and not reflective of any deficiency in those businesses or their founders. Colton's attorneys had pushed back hardest on Condition 4. It had no financial value. It could not be monetized. It was, legally, the least significant condition in the document. It was the one Wren refused to release. She had explained it to Daphne simply. He called my work a capture structure. I want it written down in a legal document that it was not. It was written down. The 5 additional parties were notified through Daphne's office. 3 of them had been unaware of the pattern. 2 had suspected but lacked the legal standing to act. All 5 received copies of the relevant documentation and the name of a litigation attorney Daphne trusted. Pauline Ashford entered into a separate arrangement with Daphne's office. She was not a defendant in the equity case, but the consulting payments required disclosure, and she cooperated fully. The cooperation was not comfortable, and the conversation Wren had with her mother afterward was not short. But it was honest, which was the only version of it that had any chance of becoming something. Beckett reopened his firm in December. Not Lane Meridian. That name had the weight of what had been done to it, and he had no interest in reclaiming it. The new firm was called Lane Works, operating out of a studio space in Dumbo, with 3 employees and the Lower Manhattan Municipal Proposal as its first active commission. Senator Harold Voss won his re-election by a narrower margin than expected and retired from the committee that governed the municipal development approval process, citing a desire to focus on constituent services. The municipal proposal moved forward. Greta Sumner attended the small dinner Beckett hosted in the Dumbo studio the night the firm officially opened. Catered, she noted, by a restaurant in Carroll Gardens she had recommended, with flowers from Ashford and Bloom arranged in 3 clay vases along the windowsill, pale garden roses and white jasmine, the same varieties Wren had used in the Voss estate columns, placed now in a room built for something that actually belonged to the people inside it. There was one more thing. Greta told Wren on a Sunday in December, over the mocha pot coffee in the back room, in the unhurried way she delivered all important information, as if it had simply become time for it. "Your father knew this building?" she said. Wren looked up. "Not personally. Not Beckett specifically. Beckett bought it after your father died." She set down her coffee. "But Dale Ashford did landscape work on 3 properties in this block in 2006. The building manager at the time, a man I knew through a mutual friend, told me about it years later. He said the landscape architect on the project had unusual ideas about sight lines and light access and would not compromise on either." Wren looked at the window. "He designed the back garden," Greta said, "the one you take your lunch break in." She did not say anything for a moment. "Beckett doesn't know," Greta said. "I only found out last year, from the old records. I didn't know how to tell either of you, or when." Wren thought about 6 years of lunch breaks in a garden her father had designed. 6 years of sitting on the back stoop of a building that had been built in one small corner of it by the same hands that had taught her what it meant to build something that lasted. She thought about sight lines and light access. She thought about pale garden roses in 3 clay vases arranged in a room built for something real. She said, "He would have liked Beckett." "Yes," Greta said, "I think so too." That evening, she told Beckett, he sat with it for a long time in the specific way he sat with things that arrived unexpectedly and required full processing. Then he said, "The garden. I never changed anything in the garden." "Why not?" "It was already right." He looked at her. Whoever designed it knew exactly where the light would be. She looked at him, at the man who had sat at the edge of her worst night and offered water without asking anything in return, who had spent 3 years being carefully invisible and had been found anyway, whose new firm had its first commission, and whose heart was doing the steady, unperformed work of a person building towards something he intended to finish. And she said, "I know." And then she said, "Come see the garden." And he did. He proposed in February in the back garden of the Bergen Street building. It was not planned for February specifically. He had been carrying the intention for several weeks, waiting for the moment that felt structurally correct. Not performed, not curated, just honest. The way the best things were. It was a Sunday afternoon. The garden was cold, the beds dormant, the old brick walls doing their particular winter thing of looking permanent and unbothered. She was there because she came here on Sundays, had come here for 6 years, would come here regardless of any occasion or intention. He came through the back gate at 3:15 with 2 coffees from the Carroll Gardens restaurant and found her on the back stoop where she always sat, in her coat with her hands in her pockets, looking at the garden that her father had laid out with his careful knowledge of where the light would be. He sat beside her. They drank the coffee. After a while, he said, "I've been thinking about load-bearing points." She looked at him. "The thing I told you about getting too careful? About understanding all the structure before trusting the construction." He held his coffee in both hands. "I understand this one. I've been watching it for 6 years from the building above it. And I've been inside it for 7 months, and I understand where the weight is and where the light comes from and what it's built to last." She was very still. "I'm not performing certainty," he said. "I'm telling you that I've done the work of understanding, and the result of the work is that I'm certain." He paused. "I would like to build something with you, formally, with the full understanding of what that means." He did not have a ring. She would later say this was the detail that made it completely right. Not the absence as oversight, but the absence as accuracy. He had not gone to a jewelry counter to select something she had not chosen. He had come to the garden her father built with 2 coffees and the honest output of his own thinking. "I have something," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a folded piece of drafting paper, the specific heavyweight variety her father had used, the kind she still kept in the shop, and unfolded it on his knee. It was a sketch. The Bergen Street garden, rendered in the precise architectural line weight she recognized from Lane Works' proposals. Every bed, every wall, every sight line her father had calculated, and at the center, in small handwriting, "Built to last." She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the garden. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "the complete, unqualified version." "Yes." He folded the paper carefully along its original creases and held it for a moment. "I'll get a ring," he said. "I want you to choose it." "I know what I want," she said. "I figured." Greta appeared in the back doorway 30 seconds later with 3 glasses of wine, which told them she had been listening for at least 5 minutes and had prepared accordingly. She handed them each a glass, raised hers, and said, in the unceremonious way she said things that mattered, "About time." The February afternoon was cold and entirely ordinary, and the garden was dormant but correctly structured, and the light was exactly where Dale Ashford had calculated it would be. And 2 people sat on the back stoop of a building on Bergen Street with their wine and their drafting paper and the specific, unperformed quality of happiness that comes not from things going right, but from 2 people choosing each other with full information. And that was, in the end, the only kind that lasted. On the first Saturday of May, they were married in the Bergen Street garden, not in a rented venue, not in a Hamptons estate with calibrated lighting and 200 guests and champagne chosen for its label. In the garden Dale Ashford had designed in 2006, with its sight lines and its calculated light, and its old brick walls that had never been changed, because whoever first laid them out had gotten them right. 22 people. Greta Sumner, Daphne Cho, Merritt Holloway, who came alone and stood near the back wall with the particular quiet of a man who appreciated good construction. 3 of the 5 parties from the settlement who had been connected through Daphne's office and had, in the months since, formed the specific bond of people who had survived the same kind of loss. Skye, who had driven from Portland and stood beside their mother without drama and without performance. 2 women finding the new shape of what they were to each other. Pauline was there. Wren had made this decision deliberately, not from the resolution of everything. That was still a thing they were building slowly, but from the understanding that presence was not approval, and that her father would have wanted her mother at his daughter's wedding, regardless of the complicated history of all the years between. The ceremony was short. The officiant was a friend of Greta's from the Cobble Hill Neighborhood Association, who had been ordained online for the occasion and treated the responsibility with appropriate gravity. Beckett wore a dark suit and the same plain, unperformed quality he wore always. Wren wore a dress the color of old ivory. She had chosen this deliberately, the same color as the Hamptons gown, not as reclamation exactly, more as a simple refusal to let the worst night of her adult life determine the palette of the best one. The flowers were her own work. Pale garden roses, dusty miller, white jasmine along the brick walls, the same varieties as the Voss Estate installation. She had arranged them the previous evening, alone in the garden at dusk, with the same knowledge of where the light would be. This time, she was building for herself. Laneworks completed the Lower Manhattan Municipal Project the following autumn. It opened to the kind of coverage that architectural work earns when it is genuinely good. Not comprehensive, but lasting. The kind of recognition that settles into the record and stays there. The performing arts component included a landscape design consultation. Beckett had credited Ashford and Bloom in the project documentation. Ashford and Bloom's partnership with Terrace Group was formalized at the start of the year. By the end of it, the Hudson Valley portfolio work had generated a body of installation design that Merritt's team used as the centerpiece of a national brand campaign. The campaign ran in shelter magazines and design publications, and, in one context, Wren found particularly satisfying, on the hoarding around a development site in Lower Manhattan, 2 blocks from the Fulton Street building where Daphne Cho had her office. Skye moved back to New York in the fall. She was working for a landscape architecture firm in Long Island City. Dale Ashford's profession arrived at Sideways through the particular route of someone who has spent a long time looking at things from the wrong angle and has finally turned around. Colton Voss relocated to Palm Beach. His development group was operational at a reduced scale, without the capital base or the board relationships that had made the previous version possible. He was not in the financial press. He was not in any press. The story that ran about him, when it ran at all, described a settlement and a restructuring and cited several parties who had declined to comment. Wren had declined to comment. There was nothing she needed to add. The documents were on the record. The conditions were in the settlement. The garden existed and was correctly designed, and the light fell where her father had calculated it would fall, and that was the kind of evidence that did not require commentary. On a Saturday evening in the back room of the Bergen Street building, 6 months after the wedding, Wren sat at her father's drafting table working on a new installation concept. A private garden for a residential client in the West Village, something that required her to think carefully about sight lines and long-term growth patterns. Beckett was at the other end of the table with a structural drawing, pencil moving in the small, precise increments she had come to recognize as his thinking mode. Greta's mocha pot was on the stove. The back garden was visible through the window in the May evening light. She looked at the sketch under her hands, the geometry of a garden she was designing for someone else, drawing with the knowledge that whoever eventually sat in it would not know her name, would not know whose hands had calculated where the light would fall. They would just find themselves in a space that felt right in a way they couldn't entirely explain. Her father had understood this, had built his entire career on it. She looked at the evening garden through the window, at the brick walls that had never been changed, at the sight lines that ran exactly where they were supposed to. She thought about a Hamptons garden on a June night, a stone ledge, a plain bottle of water offered without expectation or performance. She thought about how the specific quality of that gesture, the unhurried, undemanding, completely honest simplicity of it, had been the first true thing she had encountered in a very long evening, and how truth, once you have felt it, becomes very difficult to accept the substitutes for. She thought about her father's note in the margin of a worn drafting manual she still kept on the shelf. The difference between a garden that lasts and one that merely looks correct is whether it was built to be lived in. She picked up her pencil. She drew the sight line. Real love does not announce itself. It does not require a venue or calibrated lighting or a room full of witnesses. It sits at the edge of your worst night, and offers water without conditions, and it tells you the truth when the truth is not easy, and it builds things carefully because it intends to be standing beside them in 20 years. Choose the person who understands load-bearing points. Choose the person who designed the garden for the light, not for the occasion. And when someone offers you something honest in the dark, take it. That is where everything worth building begins, and that's where the story ends. Hey, if you're still here with us right now, genuinely, all the way to this moment, then something in this story found you. Maybe it was Wren standing in that garden, holding a bottle of water from a stranger while her whole world rearranged itself around her. Maybe it was the quiet way Beckett built things carefully because he knew what it cost to lose them. Or maybe it was just the simple, stubborn truth that the people who keep going, who keep building, keep working, keep showing up with honest hands, those are the ones who end up standing in the garden they actually deserve. You know, the Stoics had a way of cutting straight through the noise. Marcus Aurelius wrote it in his private journal, not for anyone else, just for himself. Confine yourself to the present, not the humiliation of last June, not the version of yourself that trusted the wrong person. Just, what can I build today with what I actually have in the light that's actually here? That's what Wren did. Not loudly, not dramatically. She picked up her pencil and drew the sight line. And Epictetus, a man who was literally enslaved and still chose how he thought about his own life, said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Wren lost an engagement, a family she thought she knew, and 7 years of work that had been turned into someone else's instrument. What she kept was the one thing nobody could restructure, who she was when nobody was watching. That's the lesson, not revenge, not performance. Just know your load-bearing points, know where your light comes from, and don't let anyone tell you the thing you built with your hands was just a means to their end. If this story moves something in you today, if even one moment felt like it was speaking to something real in your own life, please take a second right now and hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep walking through these stories together, because honestly, your presence here means more than you know. You stayed until the garden. That says something about you. This story is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment, emotional storytelling, and personal reflection. All characters, including Wren Ashford, Beckett Lane, Colton Voss, Sky Ashford, Pauline Ashford, Greta Sumner, Senator Harold Voss, Daphne Cho, Merritt Holloway, and all others, are completely fictional and do not represent any real individuals, living or deceased. All events, companies, legal proceedings, business entities, and situations portrayed are invented for dramatic and narrative purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, organizations, real legal cases, or real-life events is entirely coincidental and unintentional. The legal, financial, and personal scenarios depicted are dramatized for storytelling only and should not be interpreted as factual representations of real processes, real institutions, or real people. This content is designed to explore universal themes of resilience, honesty, and self-worth through fictional narrative, not to make factual claims about any individual or organization. Thank you for watching with an open heart and understanding the creative nature of this content.